Imagine this. You're a German U-boat commander in the thick of World War II. You're the apex predator of the Atlantic, a silent hunter in the deep. Your mission is to cripple the Allied supply lines, and you're good at it. Your crew, a tight-knit family of 40 men, trusts you with their lives. You've faced down destroyers, dodged depth charges, and sent countless tons of shipping to the bottom. You think you've seen it all, that you're prepared for anything the enemy can throw at you. But what if your greatest adversary wasn't another ship or a plane, but the very ocean you were trying to master? What if the deep, dark water itself decided to turn against you? This is the incredible, and often terrifying, story of how German U-boat crews discovered a new, invisible enemy, one they could never have anticipated. It wasn't a secret weapon or a new type of sonar, it was a phenomenon hidden within the ocean's depths, a deadly trap laid by nature itself. In the early years of the war, the U-boats were having a field day. Te Cadet, the happy time. Convoys were poorly defended, and wolf packs could strike with near impunity. The tonnage war was going Germany's way. But as the war dragged on, the Allies got smarter. They introduced the convoy system, beefed up their escorts with more destroyers and corvettes, and deployed long-range patrol aircraft like the Liberator, which closed the infamous mid-Atlantic gap where U-boats once roamed free. The hunters were fast becoming the hunt. Life aboard a U-boat, already a cramped, smelly, and stressful existence, became a living nightmare. The constant threat of detection by ASDIC, the British sonar, kept nerves frayed. The terrifying ping of an active sonar search was the soundtrack to their anxiety. And then came the depth charges, the sickening crunch of explosions, the lights flickering, pipes bursting, and the hull groaning under the immense pressure, threatening to implode at any moment. Crews were pushed to their limits. To survive, commanders had to develop new tactics. One of the most common was the crash dive. When spotted, the U-boat would flood its ballast tanks and plunge into the depths as quickly as possible, hoping to get below the layer where sonar was most effective and evade the rain of explosives from above. They would go deep, sometimes pushing their boats well beyond the official test depth, gambling that the steel hull would hold. And this is where things get strange. In the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, some U-boat commanders started noticing something odd. During a desperate dive, trying to escape a relentless destroyer, they would suddenly find their boat behaving weirdly. The U-boat, despite all efforts by the crew to maintain depth, would suddenly become uncontrollably buoyant. It would start rising, as if an unseen hand was pushing it back towards the surface, right back into the waiting guns of the enemy. Imagine the sheer panic in the control room. You're desperately trying to stay deep, to stay Eden, but your submarine is betraying you. It's ascending against your will, and you have no idea why. Alarms are blaring. Men are shouting, and every second that ticks by brings you closer to the surface and certain destruction. Other times, the exact opposite would happen. The boat would suddenly become heavy, sinking like a stone, plummeting into the crushing depths far below its maximum safe dive limit. The crew would frantically blow the ballast tanks, trying to shed weight. But the descent would continue. The depth gauges spinning wildly as the pressure on the hull mounted to terrifying levels. What was going on? Were these ghost currents? Some new, diabolical, Allied weapon? For the crews experiencing this, it was inexplicable and horrifying. They were seasoned sailors who knew the ocean. But this was something else entirely. They were caught in a vertical trap, either shot up into a kill zone or dragged down to a crushing demise. Reports of these bizarre incidents began filtering back to U-boat command, baffling engineers and ocean. The answer, when it finally came, was as fascinating as it was deadly. The culprit was a phenomenon known as an internal wave. Now, we're all familiar with surface waves, the kind you see at the beach. They're caused by wind blowing over the water. But the ocean isn't a uniform body of water. It's made up of different layers, much like an onion. You have layers of cold, dense, salty water at the bottom, and layers of warmer, less dense water on top. The boundary between these layers is called a... You can't see them from a ship or a plane. They are invisible giants, sometimes hundreds of feet high, rolling silently through the deep ocean. They're generated by tides, by currents flowing over underwater mountains, or even by strong storms on the surface. Now, think about It's essentially a neutrally buoyant object. The crew meticulously trims the ballast to make it hang perfectly stable at a certain depth. It's a delicate balancing act. But what happens when one of these colossal internal waves comes along? If a U-boat is cruising along and gets hit by the crest of an internal wave, it's suddenly pushed into a layer of much denser, colder water. The submarine, which was perfectly balanced moments before, is now suddenly far too buoyant for its new environment. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The boat is forced upwards uncontrollably. This explains the terrifying, uncommanded ascents that pushed U-boats to the surface. Conversely, if the U-boat found itself in the trough of an internal wave, it would be plunged into a layer of warmer, less dense water. Suddenly, the submarine becomes incredibly heavy. The water can no longer support its weight. It begins to sink, and sink fast. This was the cause of the sudden, catastrophic dives into the crushed depths. The U-boat crews were, quite literally, being tossed around by invisible underwater mountains and valleys. They were fighting a battle against ocean physics itself. A destroyer hunting a U-boat might drop depth charges, and by pure chance, the U-boat commander might dive right into an internal wave. The boat then pops back up to the surface, and the destroyer crew thinks their depth charges were perfectly placed, when in reality, the ocean itself served the U-boat up on a silver platter. Die Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, eventually began to understand this phenomenon. They started issuing warnings and charts showing areas where internal waves were common. Commanders were taught to be aware of sudden, unexplained changes in buoyancy and to react instantly, either by flooding tanks to counteract an ascent or blowing them to halt a descent. But in the heat of battle, with depth charges exploding all around, it was an incredibly difficult thing to manage. This hidden danger adds another layer of respect for the men who served on all submarines during the war. Life inside a U-boat was already one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable. Of de Rogli, 40,000 men who served in the German U-boat fleet, nearly 30,000 never returned. They faced enemy ships, aircraft, mines, and mechanical failures. But they also faced the raw, unpredictable power of the ocean, in a way few others have. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, nature always has the final say. The German U-boat crews set out to conquer the Atlantic, but they discovered that the ocean had its own secret weapons, its own invisible traps, and it would not be tamed so easily. They were fighting a war on two fronts, one against the Allied navies, and another against the very depths they called home. It's a chilling, fascinating piece of history that shows how even the most formidable hunters can find themselves at the mercy of a force far greater than any human enemy. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the hidden corners of history. See you next time.